podcast episodes every Wednesday. And I was looking back through my emails so I could tell the story of how this all got started. And this actually began in January of this year with basically a submission to an office suggestion box. One of our communications specialist, Callie Andrus, who's on our marketing team, she sent an email to this, just an idea suggestion box email address, and Mike McIntyre picked it up, and all she said was, "How about a podcast about the mayor's race?" And Mike sent it to me, and we got to talking later on in the sort of winter and spring, and planned out sort of how we wanted to go about covering this race. Obviously, a significant one because your first new mayor in 16 years, first open race with no incumbent in 20 years, and it was an opportunity not just to sort of cover the politics of the race, but to also get into how is Cleveland doing right now as a city? What are the big issues facing us as a community? And what do voters want from their candidates as they think about and wrestle with these big issues? And so, that's what I kind of saw as being the focal point of this podcast, beyond just sort of the election itself, really looking at, well, how can we use this as a window to telling the story of Cleveland right now, while also kind of following the news and the campaign hijinks and all the rest.
Right. Yeah, one of my favorite elements of the podcast is the opening 5 or 10 minutes where you just sort of recap the news on the campaign trail that week, before diving into the central stories or themes. How far in advance do you plan out each episode? I mean, it feels like you're kind of reporting it out each week.
Well, sometimes we are. I developed an episode plan early on, that just sort of charting our path, like from the beginning until the primary, with possible topics. And so there were certain stories that I knew going into it I wanted to tell, like campaign finance, looking at who is giving money to the candidates and how they're spending it, and looking at this whole issue of development, being starting to explode now in certain neighborhoods of the city, while at the same time there are lots of neighborhoods that are really struggling right now. Like, I knew I wanted to tell those stories going into it. And we put out a call to the rest of our staff to say, hey, if you guys have ideas, if there's stories that you want to tell, here's your chance to go follow them. And even if it's not in your beats, like, just go ahead and follow what interests you. And we brought in some cool stories that way as well. Like Gabriel Kramer had a piece this week looking at the electorate and why do young people, typically speaking, not vote in these municipal races. Now, that said, I do need to start planning out what we're going to do for the general election. And so that's the sort of the anxiety that is beginning to creep up on me now, because we are getting very close to it.
Is the plan still to have a weekly episode and through the general?
Yeah. I think we gotta firm this up, but I think we're gonna take a week off after the election, just to kind of yeah, I know, but just to get back into get a head start on things, sure. So we can get a running start. But yeah, I mean, the plan is to go through the general election, and we'll probably have some episode after that, an in-depth interview with whoever wins, with the next mayor of Cleveland.
Yeah,
if they'll talk to me.
Well, I'm sure they will, Nick. I mean, you're not me. So next week, the primary is on Tuesday, and the episode will air Wednesday morning. Still, is that still the schedule?
Sure is. It's going to be.
What's your Tuesday night like?
Well, so we are going to send candidates out we're going to send reporters out to many of the election night watch parties.
Okay.
And so the goal is to get tape from those, to get reaction voices of the candidates, either their victory speeches, the 2 victory speeches, and the 5 concession speeches, and throw that all into an episode basically overnight, so people can get the feel of the last night of this primary on Wednesday morning.
Nice, that's great. And also, I mean, it seems like it's an enormous amount of work, editing work, putting together a single episode, right? I mean, that takes significant time. Is that who's the team at ideastream putting it together?
So individual reporters will produce their own pieces, so
Like,
they will put all those elements together. But I collect everything then, and I produce the final mix.
okay.
So typically I will spend the week trying to tag along as best I can with these candidates as I learn about their events, just to get that kind of the scenes, the flavor of the campaign trail, such as it is.
Yeah.
And that's what I pour into that beginning kind of news roundup part, where we just give you a sense of what they've been up to the past week. And then but everything else is I'm kind of mixing down the final stuff, and then send it to editors to give it a listen and make sure it sounds okay. And then we send it out to the world.
There's definitely a different cadence to the reporting schedule when you're really only producing one major, almost magazine style piece every week. And so I imagine you supplement, I know you supplement that with just Twitter commentary throughout the week, but do you ever get a sense that you're getting sort of behind the news because something might happen on a Wednesday morning and you won't be able to put it out till the next week?
Oh yeah, this has happened. There have been multiple times where candidates have had big endorsements that they roll out on Wednesday, just as the podcast comes out. I think the Mike White endorsement was on a Wednesday. The Frank Jackson endorsement of Kevin Kelly might have been on a Wednesday too, if I'm remembering right. So, they're really messing with my schedule.
What the hell are they thinking though? Shouldn't they, don't they know that it's the most important game in town to be on after Jackson?
I think the most important game in town is to be on local television. That's the reality. But we can think otherwise, but I know.
Well, since you mentioned local TV, perhaps we could segue into media coverage generally of the race. We can kind of debate this or talk about this as much as you want, but what's your read on the coverage thus far in 2021?
Well, I think that for a while, especially early on, it was weird because I was one of the only people kind of out early on following the candidates around. And I remember, I went to this one, there were a few events that I've gone to actually. One was when Kevin Kelly was endorsed by the Conwells, by Kevin and Yvonne Conwell, city and county council members of Glenville. And they gave me the address of where this, they teased it as big endorsements coming.
Right,
and they gave me the address, and so I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, this is the Conwell zone. And I showed up, and I was the only reporter there, and which it's kind of understandable. I get that people are not going to follow every single daily twist and turn of the campaign, but it put me in kind of a funny position because here we are on the Conwell's front porch. I'm recording for the podcast, and then the Kelly campaign team is there shooting it for Facebook Live. And so they finish with the remarks and stuff, and then I'm there to ask questions, and I'm like, I had to get up a little closer to them so I could get good quality sound. So I think I ended up in their Facebook Live video. And so it's just a weird moment of I'm covering this, but now I'm also a part of the campaign media operation just by being present. Anyway, a long discussion just to say there has not been a ton of day in, day out coverage. And some of that might be, because there's 7 candidates to follow around. And, if you actually wanted to trail them every day, you would need to deploy 7 people.
Yeah.
And so, that's a tough thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's pretty disappointing, actually. You've mentioned the stakes of the election. This is, the most significant municipal election in some years. I thought we would see kind of special productions, kind of like After Jackson, at a number of the local outlets, and that most of the TV stations and Cleveland.com and others Cleveland Magazine would be devoting a reporter or two to regular drumbeat coverage of the campaigns. I was expecting, I think there's an enormous amount of resident excitement, voter interest in the campaign, but just not much from local media. I really haven't seen much. You're absolutely correct that when I've gone to campaign events, it's usually you there and maybe 1 or 2 TV cameras, occasionally one other reporter. It's pretty anemic.
Well, you are seeing now that the TV stations have been doing those in-depth sit-down interviews with the candidates.
Right.
And Cleveland.com has done interviews with the candidates as well for their podcast. And, they've been pretty on top of Seth Richardson has been pretty on top of this whole, HB6, First Energy, Cleveland Public Power angle, tracking, how that money is entering into Cleveland politics and what the candidates say about those policy issues. So, you are seeing other media outlets kind of take a, take an approach that's unique and that stands out. So, I mean, you are starting to see that coverage now, but
I think you're being too kind. I think you're being far too kind. You are seeing some coverage. No, and I honestly feel there's no doubt. I mean, I think Cleveland.com's HB6 coverage has been phenomenal for the past year, really, really good. But there just has not been sufficient mayoral race coverage, I think, from across town. And you're absolutely right. I mean, like I was struck. We've talked at Dennis Kucinich events. I mean, I think Kucinich is operating as if there's a fully functional, robust media system in town, sending out press releases every day, expecting reporters to cover it. And there's just so many of these releases that aren't getting covered from all the candidates. I imagine there are events that the press conferences that they host where no one shows up. It's an unusual dynamic when then their own campaign team Facebook Lives it or streams it in some way, and that's the only coverage of the event.
Yeah, I mean, it is a weird situation. And what's interesting too, though, is that a lot of the candidates are pretty proactive with like Facebook Live. And I mean, Bashir Jones, we all know, is all over Instagram.
Right.
And so in some ways, the candidates are kind of their own, first media outlet too. They are covering themselves. I mean, the Dennis comment is funny because, I mean, he certainly has seemed to have like the most variety of campaign mailers. There's like a different theme, a different design every week. I read a book recently called The Crisis of Growth Politics, which is, it's actually a kind of a doctoral dissertation about like local economic policy and how politics plays into it. But it focuses on Dennis Kucinich's years as mayor. And it was written by someone who actually worked for Kucinich for a little bit. And so he got an inside look at both City Hall and the 79 campaign. And he said that Kucinich basically ran his campaign like an alternative media. They were out delivering leaflets to people all the time. And it seems like he is following a very similar approach to what he did in the 70s. This is his style.
Well, what's interesting is given the what I suspect is pretty dismal news literacy in town, with the proliferation of like these candidate-specific newspapers or what have you, there are a number of savvy voters who instantly recognize that as just a campaign literature, but others who might not. And a piece of campaign lit comes to the doorstep and it looks like a newspaper. For all they know, it's like an actual piece of news.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, that, the one newspaper that just came out from Citizens for a Better Cleveland, it's, very pro Kucinich and pro Zach Reed. I know your colleague, Vince Gregoric, posted that it's the same group that is buying a scene cover wrap for Dennis this week, and that everyone's favorite restaurateur, Tony George, was the one who was doing the billing on that. Now, I asked George if he was connected to the newspaper, and he told me he wasn't, for what it's worth.
It's just bullshit. It's just straight bullshit.
It's campaign season. That's what it's about. So, you do see, though, I mean, you've got these organizations now that are putting out this information, purporting to be news outlets. There's another one I'm very interested in called Cleveland Neighborhood News, which has strenuously denied any connection to candidates or PACs, and even told me I'm on legal notice that they're telling the truth, which is very kind of them to say. So I don't know.
They're producing precisely the same material as Citizens for Change in terms of its anti-Kucinich and anti-bib flavor, right?
It is very obvious to any astute observer that this is not a legitimate news outlet. But is someone just seeing something shooting across their Facebook feed? Are they going to make that same distinction? I don't know.
Yeah, Nick, I mean, you're probably the most astute news observer we have here in Northeast Ohio. I mean, not everyone's up to your level of astuteness.
Well, I mean, you saw that during the 2016 and 2020 campaigns as well. I mean, I think the Trump campaign really put a lot of emphasis on this sort of digital news kind of thing, where there was just a flood of like, information coming across your Facebook feed. People don't know what's true and what's not, and what's maybe, being pushed by a campaign or people sympathetic to a campaign. And so, it does become a confusing environment, one would imagine.
No doubt. No doubt. Any other, we're getting close to 12:20 when I wanted to move on, but any other media angles you wanted to discuss here, Nick?
Well, I mean, I would also just say that, as much as we've talked about there not maybe being that much coverage of this race yet, this race is not ending next week. That's the primary. And this will whittle the field down to 2. And then we will have a general election where I'm sure there will be many more opportunities for coverage, and things will probably heat up.
Yeah, good point. Good point, Nick. Ever the optimist. How would you, so for those who, I mean, I don't know, we've got 45 participants here. I presume most of them have a working knowledge of the candidates and so forth, but what's your kind of big picture assessment of the candidates and where they stand at this point?
I mean, who knows, right? It's like there's been so little polling, public polling. It's just hard to get much of a sense. And I don't know a ton about like the mechanics of polling, but I would imagine that polling a very low turnout race has got to be tough.
Right.
Who is a likely voter? Typically you can assume that like older voters who live in higher turnout neighborhoods like West Park or Lee Harvard are probably more likely voters than maybe somebody who is 25 years old and lives in Clark Fulton, Ward 13, which is one of the lowest turnout neighborhoods in the city. But who knows? There could be surprises. I mean, Justin Bibb and Bashir Jones both have tried to, get a message out to younger voters who might not typically vote in a race like this. I mean, Jones goes so far as to like personally ask people to come down to the Board of Elections while he's like hanging out there to try to get people in to vote. Is that going to actually yield numbers for him? I don't know. His Ward 7 is actually leading, last time I checked anyway, was leading the in-person early voting at the Board of Elections, but that was only like 100 or so votes. I mean, we're not talking about huge numbers. But anyway, I think that the limited polling that we have seen has put Dennis Kucinich at the top, which certainly there's a certain logic to that because he has the most name recognition and has been around the longest. And then that second place spot, I don't know. I maybe there's going to be a surprise. I mean, Zach Reed, although maybe he hasn't gotten a lot of headlines this race, he was the runner-up in 2017. He's got a base in the Ward 2 area, and so there were a lot of people who voted for him last time. So we'll see if they change their mind or if they stick with him this time.
Yeah, and maybe this is incorrect. I had this in my own mind. I had kind of put Dennis Kucinich and Kevin Kelly on the west side, and then actually Justin Bibb and Bashir Jones as kind of a top 4. And for maybe this is inaccurate, but I had assumed that Zach Reed and Sandra Williams would sort of be spoilers. And it's interesting to see how that's evolved over the past several weeks. I mean, I think the poll in August, the Change Research poll or whatever, the one where Dennis was leading, I think you had Kevin, Zach, Justin, Bashir, all at like 11 to 13%. They're all clustered around them. So it's really a situation, and especially with low turnout. I mean, 50 or 100 votes could make a substantial difference. I mean,
right.
The election could hinge on 50 or 100 votes.
I mean, yeah, and who knows what the difference is going to be between that number 2 spot and that number 3 spot. I mean, I would not be surprised if it was a small margin.
I think the one dynamic in recent weeks, we alluded to that Citizens for Change PAC, which on its website self-identifies as a anti-Kucinich PAC. It's like its whole purpose is ensuring that Dennis doesn't return to office. And yet last week, while I was out of the country, incidentally, they released the anti-Bibb mailer, which of course darkened his skin and referenced his past traffic violations and so forth, which to me indicated that I think Kelly might be getting a little nervous and maybe realizing that, attacking Kucinich might not be his only avenue, that Bibb might be eating into his West Side votes because he's so popular on the near West Side.
it's we can speculate a lot about what we think are the intentions of Citizens for Change, and unfortunately, we're probably not going to see who's funding them until January of next year.
Right.
So, which was exactly the same thing that happened in 2017. There was a super PAC that supported Frank Jackson. It was called Cleveland Forward, I want to say, something like that.
They didn't emerge until closer to the general, though, right?
Yeah, they emerged a lot later. I think it was after the primary. I think
Right.
there was some reporting at the time, maybe by Mark Namick or others, that kind of suggested that there were people who were surprised that Jackson did not perform as well as they had hoped in the primary. They were marshaling resources to make sure he won.
Yeah.
But anyway, they didn't have to file their campaign disclosures until 2018. So, we will not see who's funding that in all likelihood until after the general election. Although if someone on this call knows and they want to tell me, get in touch.
It occurred to me to just check the chat, which I had not done. Although Nick, I mean, everyone knew, didn't, or I shouldn't say everyone, but people knew who was behind that PAC in 2017, even before the disclosures, right? Wasn't it only 3 or 4 sources? It was Radner.
There were only a few donors, and so I mean, people could probably make educated guesses. They were not raising from a broad base.
Right. From what I'm gathering, Citizens for Change is reaching out for soliciting donations, and as far as I can tell, they were telling people that this was an anti-Kucinich PAC. Give us money so we can ensure that Dennis doesn't win again. And I think there probably was some, I don't know if I'd say a sense of betrayal, but certainly some head scratching when they saw the anti-bid mailer, which many people took exception to.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's I would love to hear more about what their strategy is and why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, I'm sure they won't tell you.
I can guarantee you they won't.
Yeah. Hold on. I'm just gonna check the chat here real quick to see if there's any questions. Any thoughts to do what they think about the candidates who advance? Who is doing polling and what numbers are you hearing? So Nick, the polls, one was, are you familiar with these organizations? The Change Research, the August one?
I actually don't know a ton about that organization and what their, polling is like. That was, I believe, commissioned by the North Shore AFL-CIO.
It was.
Which endorsed Dennis Kucinich. They're Kucinich supporters. And that poll was an online poll, I want to say. I think they contacted people by text message and other means, but referred them to this online survey.
That's correct. I think it was 500 or thereabouts, like 450, 460, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. So, there's them. Baldwin Wallace did a poll very early on that seemed to really just show name recognition. And
which was bizarre, by the way. I mean, the results from that poll were, made me question the legitimacy of it, or at least, made me think they ought to do it again, because I just had a hard time believing those numbers.
Well, I mean, it'd be great to see more polls, this close to the election. Maybe it would give us a clearer picture.
Well, you saw in that Citizens for a Better Cleveland newspaper, they had what I presume was a privately commissioned poll, the Zogby poll.
Right.
And that also showed Dennis and Zach Reed with commanding leads. Although it's no accident, of course, that Tony George is a big donor to both Dennis and Zach, and also Bashir and Sandra.
And Sandra Williams. And, and George also told me, I interviewed him for the podcast, and he told me that he had done a poll, or he had a poll commission, and that it put Kucinich and Reed at the top. So the Citizens for a Better Cleveland results seem to scan with the poll George told me about.
Yeah, I mean, you just buy the poll that reflects the results you want to see, I guess.
Although, I mean, let's point out, Nina Turner, with great fanfare, revealed that she had a substantial lead in the congressional special election, 50% of the vote in her poll. She is not going to be in the United States Congress next year. So, those internal polls may not be telling you, what's really going to happen.
No doubt, Nick. No doubt. A very fine point. Nick, can you discuss the relationships you've noticed among the candidates themselves? How do they interact, think about, and talk about each other? This is from Sean Freeman, a guest today.
there's definitely, like, if somebody was covering this campaign extraordinarily closely, I think there's maybe like a little profile somebody could do about the friendship between Zach Reed and Dennis Kucinich.
Yeah.
They're always the ones chatting with each other at all these bazillion mayoral forums that they all go to. And
Right.
I think when I forget, I think it was WKYC, I think they had asked the candidates, who would be your second choice? And I think Dennis said Zach would be his second choice. And I even think at one point, they did this event, this NAACP Youth Forum event, and
Right, yeah.
Kucinich brought a copy of his book, not his latest book, but the one he wrote when he was running for president. What is it? Courage to Survive? I forget the title now, and I saw from afar, it looked like Dennis was writing in the book, and then he gave it to Zach. So I think I need to check, but I think he may have given Zach a signed copy of his book. So I think that there is some kind of,
That's so sweet.
Yeah, right. So, and I don't know really a ton about how the other candidates, the Courage to Survive, thank you, from Mike Barron at the Legal Women Voters in the chat. Yeah, I mean, I don't know a ton about what they really think about each other. I don't have access to their deepest thoughts.
They're spending so much time with each other. You're absolutely right. There's been an absolute abundance of neighborhood forums and campaign events where they're all showing up together. They're seeing each other virtually every night, or at least 3 to 4 nights a week. So you have to develop a sort of a rapport. And even if you're attacking one of your opponents in the context of the debate or a forum, I suspect there's a collegiality that obtains afterwards. For the most part, they're slapping hands and chatting amiably.
I think everyone in Cleveland knows how to do the stop and chat, so I'm sure they're doing it.
They do, although you can tell. I mean, at least during the forums themselves, there's some people bristle at each other. I mean, Kevin Kelly and Dennis have gotten into some dust ups that seemed pretty personal.
Well, I mean, at the debate, they were certainly some of the prime users of rebuttal time, going after each other. And, it seems to be very clear that, Kelly and Dennis see each other as being, prime rivals, or at least Kelly sees Dennis as being his prime rival. And, so you got to see that as also factoring into things. Sure.
Mm-hmm. What about issues, Nick? What are the major issues of the campaign, and what are you surprised has not been more central?
I mean, I was surprised when I sat down with all the candidates in late June and asked them, what's the number one issue in Cleveland? Mm-hmm. Almost all, or what's the number one issue on voters' minds in this election? Almost all of them said public safety.
That's right.
I mean, it just seems like, especially out of the starting gate, all the candidates saw crime as being a top concern. And, it certainly makes sense if you look at the spike in homicides that happened during the pandemic. I mean, there has been a lot of gun violence in Cleveland. And it makes sense that a lot of people who live in neighborhoods, who experience this are really concerned about it. And, the first place they'll probably look is to their city government. It's interesting that this is happening, just after there's been a sort of a huge public reckoning in the wake of the killing of George Floyd about, police departments. How do police respect people's civil rights? A movement on the left to defund police departments. So it's interesting to see candidates sometimes, I think, trying to speak to both at once, saying, I think, yes, police need to be doing more to keep us safe, but I also think they need to respect people's constitutional rights, and we got to do both. I mean, I don't think, people are trying to sort of hit both of those points, which is interesting to me.
Yeah, it actually blows my mind that there's been such limited support for the Citizens for a Safer Cleveland ballot initiative and other, criminal justice type reforms. I mean, the embrace of the police and the kind of the crime rhetoric has been through the roof in a way that I find pretty gross.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see how that ballot initiative does in November. clearly they got a lot of signatures. I mean, they've been able, I think they're on the ballot, or they're going to be. So
Oh, yeah.
I think they succeeded in getting the many signatures that they needed. Is it what the 2021 November electorate will want, which could be 25% of the overall city electorate, and will probably skew older. Is this something they want? I don't know. Well, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, I guess what I mean is that I assumed many of the candidates would see supporting that initiative as advantageous to them, given the recent George Floyd protests in Cleveland. I thought many of them would try and ride the wave, and clearly they're not.
Well, and maybe that tells us that there's another wave to ride, which is a reaction to that, a wave that says we really, don't want to bust up police forces right now. I mean, it's interesting to see, Kucinich has come out very strongly against the Citizens for Change initiative, and Justin Bibb has been very for it.
Kucinich is against it for the dumbest possible reason. Kucinich, I mean, well, his reading of that ballot language, I may be just wrong, but the way he framed it is that he thinks it would impinge upon the authority of the mayor, and basically he wants total control to fire the police chief and stuff, right? That he feels like citizens elect him, so then he should have the power to do that.
I think that if you read the ballot language, or the actual initiative, the amendment language, I think that it does give the police review board and the community police commission much greater power over things
doubt.
like hiring and firing officers, over discipline policies. And so to that degree, it does, it does take away power from maybe the rest of the command structure within the city. But that's the point. I mean, it's a citizen oversight amendment. That's what it's intending to do. Now, Kucinich just claimed something like it would even allow them to fire the mayor, which I think is a very strained reading of the language. I don't think that's what it's saying.
Yeah, I think it's a misreading of the language.
Well, yes, it's a misreading of the language. It's going too far. But it would significantly change, I think, the way that these civilian boards have oversight over the police.
Yeah, it's honestly just curious to me as a guy, a candidate who built his career on populism, that he would be so resistant to what seems like a populist initiative, giving more power to the people. Anyway, well, that's just one campaign theme. I've been surprised, Nick, that there really hasn't been too much about public health in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic until Ron Regan at Channel 5 did the COVID story last week. There's almost no talk about COVID-19. I know. Kevin Kelly will typically say in his introductory remarks that he wants to recover from the pandemic equitably. He wants all of us to, Cleveland to thrive. But there really hasn't been much talk about it.
No, you're right. I mean, I think Kelly has made a point to sort of frame at least his economic message in terms of the pandemic and the recession that came out of it, and the sort of, labor mismatch that we're seeing now. But yeah, I mean, especially considering the fact that the Cleveland Public Health Department has been under a lot of scrutiny and has had all kinds of management issues, and is now
it's in disarray. It's in shambles. It's a disaster, Nick.
And why are candidates not speaking about that? I mean, it's a good question. Maybe they just think it's not going to catch hold with voters. I don't know. I mean, but it seems like a prime topic for somebody to latch upon.
There are so many what I would consider softballs that they're just not taking and running with at all. I mean, for example, just for one example, where has been the discussion about the progressive field deal? In 2017, as you very well remember, the Q deal was probably the central issue in the campaign. It became this downtown versus the neighborhoods debate, but it was all talking about the Q deal. There's been no talk. I mean, I think Cleveland.com did one. They asked the candidates about it, and they did kind of a story. Here's how they responded. Right. But at these events, as far as I know, it hasn't been asked once. No one's talked about it. I feel like it's such a popular issue to get behind. No one's embracing it. No one's running with it.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's there's probably a whole, set of stories to be done about just the things candidates are not talking about, and trying to figure out why this hasn't, gotten to the top of their, talking points.
Well, I think it sucks.
But hey, we got a whole general. You got what? A couple more days of the primary and a whole general election to talk about the progressive field deal.
That's true. That's true. I have a number of specific points I wanted to bring up. One was, I guess I wanted to pick your brain on voter indecision, because we mentioned that poll from August in which Kucinich was in the lead with 20%, but actually the number one response was undecided or not sure, which means that I really think there's one reason we're seeing this number of campaign events. And I'm not sure what your traffic is like, but I mean, we're seeing a ton of readership on our mayoral race stories.
Yeah,
I think people are hungry for information and insight into the race, because people are genuinely not sure who they're going to vote for. I mean, I've talked to a lot of voters who are maybe have narrowed it down to 2 or 3 candidates, but still a week out don't know, haven't made up their mind fully.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting, and I mean it is. I mean, one of the big contributing factors probably to all this uncertainty over who is going to win out. Is someone actually going to win over a lot of those undecided voters, or are some of those voters who have maybe told pollsters that they're undecided, but they're just not going to vote? I mean, that's to me at least the big question is how many people are actually going to show up.
Right. And I know some people are just kind of who aren't blown away by any of the candidates, who I think probably will sit it out and just wait until the general to pick one of two, to kind of let fate decide who the final 2 will be. But I do think you're right, that could hamper turnout in the primary for sure.
Well, or I mean, it's definitely I'm at least thinking that the fact that it's an open field, you got these 7 candidates, you got people spending money, going door to door, doing real campaigning, that is going to mean more turnout in this primary than we saw 4 years ago. Well, it's not a hard, it's not a high bar to jump over. I think it was like 13% in the primary in 2017. If we got to 20%, I think that would be progress.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt. I mean, 15% would be progress, as sad as it is. But you're right. I mean, I think when Jackson was in the race, there's just so much apathy. They assume it's a foregone, voters assume it's a foregone conclusion. And I mean, I do think that the field this year is far and away more competent and interesting than in 2017. I mean, 2017, there were a bunch of jokers in that race. I mean, it was embarrassing. Now we've got you have 7 legitimate candidates, 6 who have you could argue have a shot at winning. And I just think it's a better field.
Absolutely. I mean, and people with more experience. I mean, you've got a mix of people with less political experience, like Justin Bibb, who's never run for office before, Bashir Jones, who has run, I think, twice for city council, winning one of his races narrowly, but who nevertheless have some name recognition and some online following.
And money.
And money too. That's a good point. And then you've got folks like Sandra Williams, who, although she has not really won the money game, she does have independent support from like the SEIU, District 1199. There's a super PAC called Cleveland for All that sent out a mailer for her.
That's right.
Don't discount the fact that she's been on the ballot before in much of Cleveland, much of the East Side anyway, I think, except for Ward 1 on the East Side. So, I mean, that's valuable. Zach Reed has, 17 years of experience on city council. People no doubt criticize that experience, but it also means his name has been around. And Kevin Kelly, he's also been around for quite some time and is definitely known. So, and of course, Kucinich is Kucinich. So yeah, it's just it just adds a whole new dynamic to it, because I could see it going a lot of different ways.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, pick 2 names from a hat, and I pretty much wouldn't be surprised at the outcome, with the exception of Ross DeBello. God bless him. Yeah, there's any number of ways it could go. You mentioned Kevin Kelly's name recognition. You would think, as council president since 2014, it would be pretty high. But according to that Baldwin Wallace poll, no one knew who he was, which that was crazy to me. He was like below Bashir, below Zach. It was way down there.
I think one thing to consider, because I thought about that too. I think one point would be like Kelly as council president is known to like the people in the room here, people who are in the press who are covering this or who just kind of know, who are the power brokers and movers and shakers in town. But I don't believe he has been on the ballot citywide before. That essential question of people going into the voting booths, how many people have seen his name on their ballot before? And I think that's a key factor in name recognition too. And that may be sort of a detriment because he may be known in Ward 13, his ward, but is he as well known, say, in Ward 9, where the Conwells, who are known, have endorsed him? I mean, I think that's why that endorsement was so important to him, because it gets his name out in places where he hasn't been on the ballot before.
Well, that was also important to him because they're Black people. And other than Ross DeBello, Kevin Kelly, I think, has the lowest Black support among all the candidates.
Well, and that's race and geography are very closely linked in Cleveland, and that plays into politics in ways that are very clear.
No doubt, no doubt. I'm going to just hop into the chat once again. Okay. How do you compare the Kucinich of 2021 to the Kucinich of 1979? Ooh.
Well,
he's much older, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, that's for sure. And I mean, there's probably similarities in their campaigns, like the two people, Dennis and Dennis's campaigns, in the sense that they are going with this kind of alternative media approach, not really doing sort of the, broadcast news kind of thing, focusing on mailers, a very old school way of doing it. 79 was just a very different time too. Cleveland was much bigger. There were a lot more voters. The political culture was different. The racial makeup of the city was different. And so, he is running in a different city, and, he's running as somebody who is probably, is well known now, at least nationally, for his presidential campaigns, which is just, whereas the Kucinich of the 70s was known for being, kind of a hellraiser on city council, who was a critic of the Stokes administration, who, was always feuding with George Forbes. I mean, it's just, he's occupying an environment with a whole bunch of different characters now too.
I also don't think that if he were to be elected, I mean, I'm not of the opinion that it would be the same level of administrative chaos that we saw in 1978, 79. I mean, when he was in his early 20s, appointing his buddies as directors, people with no experience, firing people left and right. I mean, I think he has enough experience, political experience under his belt to be a better manager. That's just my hunch.
Well, some of those young people are still with him. Andy Junowitz was his press secretary at City Hall back in the day, and he's working on the campaign. Joe T. Green, former finance director for the city of Cleveland, is now, I believe, the campaign treasurer. So yeah, I mean, some of those guys are still around.
They certainly are. And in fact, many of the voters are still around. Didn't you say that in the most recent episode that the median primary voter birth year was 1954?
I believe it. I think it was 57 or 58. But I mean, the point stands that we're talking, if you look at the universe of people who voted in the primary 4 years ago, who are still registered to vote in Cleveland today. So some people have dropped off, they've moved, they've died, whatever. But if you look at the people who are still there, who have a voting record that tells us they voted in the primary 4 years ago, the median age today is they're in their 60s. And that's the median. And so that tells you that the electorate skews older, and that, at least comparing to 2017, younger people in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s were just not voting in the same, in the same way.
Yeah. We've got a question here. I know I have an answer. It says, do you feel that local media has asked candidates tough questions, i.e. Bashir and his women video, Sandra on HB6 and her past discretions, Dennis and his 400 police number, etc.? Do you?
Yeah, I think so. I think they've all faced questions about those. Are people satisfied with their answers? That's a question for the voters to decide. But
That's the
you
thing.
know.
I mean, I feel like you can only ask them the same question so many times. I mean, they have their pat answer that they generally respond with. Although I will say that I think the toughest questioning was at the West Park Forum, not by journalists, but by Councilman Brian Casey and Charles Slife. They asked the toughest questions of the entire campaign.
Yeah, Casey did a great job. You know, the way that was structured was there were certain questions that went to all the candidates, but Casey had a pointed question for every candidate, you know, just sticking his finger right in their weaknesses. And it was fun.
It was intense. Man.
Probably one of the best events of the whole campaign.
I actually really I appreciated that structure, the sort of the back and forth between the round robin and then the individual questions. I thought that was nice. In fact, it's the only one that structured it that way that I've been to all year. And even in 2017, it was just a cool way to structure it. Nick, do you expect losing candidates to be offered prominent positions in the new administration?
I have no idea. Who knows? I have no idea.
I will say in the most recent, I just watched the versus debate with Bashir Jones and Justin.
Yes.
And at the end of that debate, Bashir, he commented that Justin Bibb was a really smart young guy, and he thought he would make a great director in his administration.
Well, you know, Mary Rose Okar said the same thing when she was with Dennis at the West Side Market. She said, you know, some of these young candidates, they're exciting, but Dennis should hire them. So there you go.
It reminds me of Kevin Kelly at the Tremont event telling Sandra Williams she was so great, Cleveland needed her down at the State House.
You know, that was a pretty funny line, and you know, it seems like even Williams got a kick out of it. I think, you know, I think everyone thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah. Nick, any particular campaign? We've only got a few minutes left, so any particular campaign moments that you'd like to highlight, or interesting kind of micro elements in the race that are worth highlighting?
Any campaign moments worth highlighting? Well, I mean, I had a really fun time at the Labor Day parade this past weekend, you know, watching all the candidates go out. Dennis Kucinich was like literally running around, like, you know, when you got to the reviewing stand at Luke Easter Park, you know, Chantel Brown is on stage as the grand marshal. And, you know, Dennis starts running, and he like ran up to the top of the reviewing stand and like said hello. And then he went right back down and was fist bumping everyone. I was not expecting to see him just kind of zoom off like that. So I don't know, that's on my mind. No, it's tough. I mean, especially with 7 candidates, like I would love to be able to just like follow them around all day long, every day, just to see how they actually talk with people, how they, you know, where they're going and how they are interacting with voters. You can catch some of it, you know, just looking at their social media posts, but it's probably not the same as being like actually there with them.
Yeah. You didn't mention Sandra's jingle.
Sandra's jingle has been stuck in my head now for days. It's
pretty good.
It's pretty good. I need to like, you know, find something else to listen to, you know, the IX Center theme or something to get it out of my head. My
favorite Sandra Williams moment, I think, which doesn't reflect favorably on her, but was actually in the After Jackson episode in which you interviewed her, and you asked her if you thought that, or if she thought that First Energy had been undermining Cleveland public power, and she said, "No, I honestly don't think so," which is outrageous. It's outrageous, Nick.
And
because of course First Energy has been working to undermine CPP.
But the first thing she said to me when I asked that question was, "No one has approached me about selling CPP," which was not the question I asked.
Yes, well, either way, a funny moment, no doubt. What about the others? I have Ross DeBello refusing to speak to Cleveland.com, kind of a funny campaign moment.
Yeah, you know, Ross, he did tell me at some point during this campaign, you know, he texted me and said, like, you know, you and Sam are the only ones who I'm going to let tell my story or something like that. You know, he's trying, I think, to take some kind of principled stand against some of the other, you know, mainstream media outlets, which is strategically speaking, not a good move if you have zero name recognition. You got to get your name out everywhere you can. And someone, you know, offering to interview you is free press. You should take it. But I'm not his campaign advisor, so, you know.
Yeah, I too thought that was a tactical misstep. Although I do, I actually respect Ross a lot. And he's, as you know, he's worked his butt off gathering signatures and doing a lot of the campaign work solo. I do think that it's, you can't win a municipal election without a serious campaign infrastructure and without a lot of money. And he just doesn't have that. So it's tough. It's tough to, I think we both take him seriously, which he appreciates, but I think it'll be tough for him to make a dent next week. Zach, any notes on Zach?
Just notes on Zach?
Yeah, the one thing I have noted is that nothing stops a bullet like a job. His slogan from 2017 would have been perfect this year. And he's got I thought that was just great in 2017. And he hasn't really broken through this year with a catchy slogan or even like a marquee policy plank.
He did, roll out his 10-point safety plan, which, I mean, was maybe too many points. You need just like maybe one or two for people to remember. But again, I'm not a campaign advisor. But yeah, and what's interesting too is because I remember asking him in our interview, I'm forgetting exactly the question now, but it was about police. And he said, I don't think people totally got my message 4 years ago. When I said I want to hire more cops, people heard I want to send more cops into your neighborhood, to cause you trouble or something. And he's like, that's not what I was trying to say. And so it almost seems like he was trying to soften or adjust his messaging from 2017, reacting maybe to something he heard about how it was received, which is interesting because some of the other candidates have seemed to move in the other direction saying, we need more cops.
Oh, well, Zach was definitely the pro-police candidate in 2017.
Yeah, well, and the CPPA, the police union, endorsed him.
Exactly. And in fact, did they show up with a tank on election night, or something?
It was not strictly speaking a tank, but it was a large vehicle.
An MRAP? Wasn't one of those big armored vehicles? Anyway, yeah, I think he, unlike some of the others, actually was affected by the George Floyd protests and did want to, like you say, he's one of the candidates that's trying to have it both ways. Increase resources for the police, but also increase discipline and constitutional policing where appropriate. Nick, time is running short, so there is one good question here that I think is worth reckoning with. Matt asks, we're talking about the race itself, but how much do you think the new mayor will actually change things in Cleveland?
That's maybe that's the question for season 2 of After Jackson. I don't know. It's a tough and big question, and I don't know that I have an answer to it. I think that's one of those wait and see things. We'll see who gets elected and what they actually set out to do. I mean, the city has a lot of employees. It's a big entity, and I'm sure there's people who have a certain way of doing things and maybe resistant to change. I don't know. Maybe there's some people who have been hungry for change, and they'll be thrilled to have someone trying to shake things up. I think it's an interesting question, and I would love to delve more into it.
Good for you, Nick. God bless you. I think any one of these candidates will remove the jersey barriers from Public Square, and if they don't do it on day one, they should be ashamed of themselves. I mean, I think there are any number of kind of low-hanging fruit policies you can snap your fingers, and just because of Jackson and the stagnancy at City Hall, you can change within a month or two. And I think
they remove the jersey barriers for events.
Yes, they do, including
trainings and
yes. Just keep them gone. Get them out of there.
But they put them back every time.
They put them back. Well, Nick, we're nearing the end here. We've got 3 minutes, but do you have a final comment or note? Oh, wait, we've got two more messages. Let's see. Oh no, just polite thank yous. Any last words, Nick?
No, I just appreciate everyone's time. Thanks for your interest in this. And, if you haven't yet, I hope you'll subscribe to After Jackson, Cleveland's Next Mayor, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can catch up on the 9 episodes we've done so far. We'll be there covering the primary election next week, and we'll be with you through the general as well. And, it feels like we're reaching the end of this campaign, but we're actually only halfway through.
And what a joy for those of us in the trenches. Nick, thank you on behalf of all the listeners here and the Press Club of Cleveland for your great work. After Jackson really is, I think, the defining piece of journalism for the campaign this year. So congratulations to you and ideastream.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Sam.
All right, guys. Thank you all for joining us today. This has been a conversation with Nick Castele, senior reporter at ideastream Public Media. Please, as he said, do subscribe and listen to After Jackson. There's a new episode out today, episode 9, which covers the primary voter turnout, among other things. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't invite you all to become members of the Press Club of Cleveland if you are not already. It's a very fun organization where we do things like this. And also, we sponsor the annual Cleveland Press Club Hall of Fame awards, which are great fun, and the local Excellence in Journalism awards. So feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, go out and vote today, tomorrow, or next Tuesday. Last opportunity. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
See you later. Thanks, everybody.